everyone. My name is Margaret Copey. I'm the convener of the League of Women Voters, and this is our first Friday of the year, and we're very happy to have with us our Helping Neighbors people, which I'll introduce them in a minute. Just a few brief announcements. This is being live streamed today, courtesy of LexMedia, and will be available, maybe, I don't know how long, a day or two, will be available on demand when they get that uploaded. We are, let's see, there will be time for questions and answers afterwards. We just ask that if we ask a question, if you'd identify yourself so that we know who you are. And with that, I'd like to introduce our three speakers here. First person we have is from FoodLink, and this is Elise. How do you say your last name?
Springle.
Springle, that was easy. And I'll let you talk about FoodLink when it's your turn. Our next speaker is George Manahan from Let's Eat Together. And the last speaker here is Bruce Newman from LexRAP, the Lexington Refugee Assistance Program. And do you know who's going to go first?
I think
you
that
are
was from FoodLink, then me, then
okay, and then if you
Bruce.
would describe your organizations when it's your turn, okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Elise.
All right. I will start us off. Well, thank you for having me this morning. Again, my name is, thank you, George. My name is Elise Springle, and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategy for FoodLink. We are a food rescue organization located just a little bit from here over in Arlington. No worries, that's of course. Our mission is that we are working to create a more equitable food system throughout Greater Boston by rescuing and distributing high-quality, customized food to under-resourced communities and by advocating for systems change. What that is trying to say is it's a long-winded way of saying that we are rescuing food to nourish our community. You'll see that as our tagline on our t-shirts, and there's a couple represented here today. What we're doing is we are working to kind of solve two problems with one solution. So the first problem is food insecurity. Food insecurity is the term used to describe when someone does not have enough food on a regular basis. It's the federal term. You'll hear it described as not knowing where your next meal is coming from or not having enough food to sustain a healthy lifestyle. We saw a lot of food insecurity increase in 2020 due to the pandemic, and that has sustained. In Massachusetts, we've experienced a 55% increase. I hear from my agencies that we work with that we are still seeing similar numbers. It kind of dipped for a bit, but with inflation, numbers are still high. This actually amounted to 1 in 3 Massachusetts residents experiencing food insecurity between 2020 and 2021, which is a staggering number. Food insecurity exists for a variety of reasons. Most commonly it's poverty, and it tends to be cyclical and very often related to other issues of systemic oppression, such as wealth and income inequality or racism or various other things that kind of keep folks in poverty cycles. It has lasting effects. It can have lasting health effects. We see increases in diet-related illnesses such as diabetes and heart disease, but it also really affects people's ability to function on a day-to-day basis. It's harder to focus on your job when you're not sure if you're going to get dinner. It's harder for children to focus on school when they're worried about these things. So it really affects not just the individuals, but our society as a whole. And this is while 40% of what we produce in this country goes to waste on the food side, which is a staggering number. It's like throwing away half of your dinner plate every night, just a little bit under. And much of this food is highly perishable and highly healthy foods, and it happens at every level of the supply chain. So from the farms to the trucking to the grocery store to our refrigerators, we are wasting food. And every time we are wasting that food, we're not just wasting that item, but all of the labor and resources and fuel that went into creating it. So it's throwing away water, it's throwing away people's time. And much of the food that is wasted is still edible when it is wasted. So that's about 70 to 90% of it. And if food waste was its own country, like if we just took all the world's food waste and made it a country, it would be the third largest producer of greenhouse gases in the world. And that means that this is something that we can do to combat climate change. If we reduce our food waste, we reduce the amount of greenhouse gases going into our environment. So we're really looking at both that social justice, food security lens, as well as the sustainability lens for our work. So what is it that we actually do? FoodLink is a food rescue organization. We are partnering with grocery stores, wholesalers, specialty shops to get their excess food product, and we take it to various nonprofits throughout Greater Boston that can use it to serve folks. Like the people I'm sitting here with today, Let's Eat Together and Lexington Rep have both been recipients of our food in the past and currently. And so we are working with around 90 agencies in a year to get food donated, and around 90 food donors to get food donated, around 90 agencies to distribute it. And there's a number of different organizations who do similar kinds of work, but what makes us unique and how we're working to mitigate these issues, we recently outlined in a strategic plan, and these are our 3 pillars. The first is really prioritizing dignity and choice when it comes to the food that we're distributing to our agencies. We hear from the food pantries or low-income housing facilities, after-school programs that we work with, about the specific needs of the folks that they're serving, whether it be that this is a population from, say, Mexico, and we really want to make sure we're getting limes or tortillas to them. It's mostly Islamic folks, and we want to make sure we're not sending pork. Or maybe it's folks who are living in single resident occupancies, just in a room, and they don't have any kind of kitchen. So we need to make sure that we're sending them things that they can put in the microwave or are ready to eat right then and there. So we really prioritize that in our distributions, and we specialize working with smaller agencies as a result of that. We're also a volunteer-based food rescue. So there's 11 folks on staff at FoodLink, but we're really the behind the scenes, kind of making sure everything runs. It's our 250 volunteers who do the food rescue, and Larry and Ivan, who are here representing that. And then the third pillar, which is new for us, is actually systems change. We are just a Band-Aid when it comes to these issues. The only way we're going to solve food waste or food insecurity is by policy change that's going to affect the number of people food insecure and the amount of food that is wasted and the systems that get food to people. So we are in the beginning stages of dipping our toes into this foray, having those conversations, figuring out the places that we can plug in and connect to that bigger conversation. This is a common misconception, is FoodLink a food pantry? We are not. We partner with food pantries. So here in Lexington, you have the Lexington Interfaith Food Pantry that is absolutely wonderful. We supply them with food. We supply meal programs and other kinds of traditional places with food. We also work with a number of more grassroots organizations. We work to facilitate pop-up food pantries in housing facilities. So you'll see us in a variety of places. And how do we rescue our food? So I mentioned before, we're powered by volunteers. You'll often see one of our vans outside of, say, the Trader Joe's in Arlington, the Whole Foods in Medford, the Costco in Waltham, where we are collecting the food. We sort it often in the parking lot and do a lot of direct delivery to our agencies. We also have our hub over in Arlington on Summer Street, where we do store some food. We have 300 square feet of cold storage, which allows us to do these last-minute deliveries to agencies that might not have refrigeration. But again, it is our volunteers who do that work, who are sorting through the cartons and cartons of strawberries that we will get, or ensuring that the packaging isn't ripped, and carefully curating those boxes that are going to go to the agencies. So I mentioned already a number of our food donors and recipient agencies. We really are that link between them. Here in Lexington, I mentioned the Interfaith Food Pantry, Lexington Eats Together. We've also partnered with Minuteman High School, where the culinary program takes our food and cooks it into meals that we then distribute to our agencies as well. This is a heat map of where we work. You'll see that it's really centered in this area. We started in Arlington, and Lexington was quickly the second community we were working in. Well, technically, we were first rescuing food in Lexington because we started with the Panera here. Yeah. So Lexington is really one of our main recipients. And what is it that we rescue? The food is really good. That's an important part of it for us, is even though this is food that technically would otherwise be wasted, the food is amazing. It is wasted for reasons like, you can barely see it in this photo, but many of those peppers just have little dimples or dents. But the skin's not broken, because if the skin's broken, we can't give it out. Those onions come from the produce market. They're just excess that wouldn't make it to market in time. Those boxes of non-perishables just have some dents in them. And then the cakes are just, they're beautiful, and bakery items are sold as day of, so we get the day old ones. And as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about different examples of how we rescue food and the impact it has, and I was reminded of, I think it was last year, still, when we received a very large donation of apples. We got a call one afternoon from a trucker who was sitting at the loading dock of a grocery store, and he had 2 pallets of apples in his truck that they were not going to take. And the reason they weren't going to take them is because one of those 2 pallets had fallen over in transit, and they were worried that the apples were bruised. So when a trucker comes up against this, in Massachusetts we have an organics waste ban, which means that companies cannot waste more than a half ton of food in a week. So the store will also not let him throw those apples into their dumpster, because they'll get fined for it. So he was frantically calling any place that he could find on his Google that might take it. So we said, come on over. And it happened to be a day that the Tufts volleyball team was coming to volunteer, and we were very happy for that, because these women unloaded those 2 pallets, which is like 2+ tons of apples, in record time. And we were able to keep those and distribute them to our various agencies. I think we found like 3 bruised apples in the whole bunch. It was so minimal. But you can imagine, like, when you think about a beautiful apple going to an after-school program so a kid can eat it, or going to a meal so it can be cooked up into apple pie for dessert, it means a lot to folks. And that's what we really prioritize rescuing. This is our breakdown from last year. You'll see mostly produce in this, as well as things like meat and dairy, really nutrient-dense foods. And this is just a little bit of our numbers from last year. We had about 19,000 volunteer hours, which I'm super excited about, and our food reached over 75,000 individuals. Yep, and this is just a little bit more information about how to get involved. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But you can, of course, volunteer with us. Be happy to chat more about that. We're always looking for financial donations. We hope folks keep in touch via our social media or newsletter. We're always looking for new food donors. We work with companies, so we're not looking for individuals to donate, but if you know a company that's looking to donate, love to talk about that. We're involved in the Universal School Meals campaign that's trying to get school meals to be something that's available to all children without having to sign up for free or reduced. And we can talk more about how to learn more about food, waste and food insecurity too after this. I will pass it on to George.
Great. Well, this is sort of moving down along the food chain. I'm George Murnahan. I'm with Lexi Together, and we're one of the recipients of the food that FoodLink rescues. They've been an important partner of ours from the beginning. We came together in 2015 to try to address issues of hunger and isolation that many people experience in Lexington. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got started, how we transitioned through COVID, and what we're doing today, and how that's going so far. the impact that we're looking to have. I'll start with a quote from our former state representative Jay Kaufman about how it's a little known fact that people in Lexington are food insecure. We think of Lexington as a well-to-do community, which it is, but that doesn't rule out the fact that there are many among us who are food insecure. A little bit on the statistics side. We have 1,200 residents, according to the census, who live below the federal poverty level. And of course, the federal poverty level is a nationwide number rather than a local one. And this being an expensive place to live, you can imagine the stress that creates. Another 3,000 people in Lexington qualify for fuel assistance in the winter months, which is again another significant population in financial stress. And about 600 students in the Lexington school systems qualify for meal assistance. So that is a significant pocket of people who are not for whom putting a meal on the table is not a sure thing. And with food costs and the challenges of the pandemic, it's only become more difficult. And as you know, pandemic support funding has waned, as costs have risen. This has put more families in that difficult place. Lexi Together started in 2015. A group of us came together, and we felt that we were aware of other programs in other towns that provided a community meal for people in need. And we thought this was something that would complement other efforts like the Lexington Interfaith Food Pantry and other efforts by the town to support people in need. So we
Bruce Lynn?
That's Bruce Lynn, yes. So Bruce would actually is a great example. If those of you know, Bruce is the head chef at Lexi Together, but he's been a longtime volunteer at FoodLink, and he is one of the people who's been involved with Lex Wrap to start. So
He probably could have done the presentation for all of us.
he could, but he's in Florida right now, so I'm afraid he would be able to speak to all of it. We operated our in-person meal at the Church of Our Redeemer in a wonderful, great hall facility and kitchen that the church has for almost 5 years on every Wednesday night. And we would have somewhere between 70 and 80 people come and have a seated meal. And the idea was, Lise talked a little earlier about dignity, but the creating an environment where people would come, feel welcomed, and be seated, have a seated dinner served to them, was an experience that we thought would really, in addition to the nutrition, the company and companionship around the table was terrific, and we attracted a wide variety of guests. Spoken to the dignity point. We suspended our dinner with the pandemic in March of 2020. It's hard to believe it's been, it's 3 years. Sometimes it feels like 1 year, and sometimes it feels like 10. But we looked for other ways that we could be, we could continue to be of service. One of the things was, although we had a fair number of guests who crossed over with the food pantry, many didn't, and trying to get them connected with the food pantry as a source so that for their food needs was an important point. And supporting the food pantry with our volunteers and with donations to help them with the increased demand that they felt. We also worked together with FoodLink and with Minuteman High School to create a prepared meal option for food pantry guests. And where in a case where FoodLink provided food to Minuteman made that into prepared meals. Some of those meals went to us, some of them went to other distribution, but that provided another alternative for food pantry clients. We also picked up a program preparing bagged lunch for a local day shelter. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Because of the pandemic, it was difficult for us having 70 or 80 people and 10 to 20 volunteers working in close proximity clearly wasn't a good, the right way to go. So we came up with and launched this fall a to-go alternative, in which, as a means of kind of building back to a point where we might be able to open that dinner again on a public basis. So now what we do is we offer prepared meals to LexMedia guests, and we've had a program of outreach that's to get guests, make sure guests are aware of this. Guests order a meal in advance with a choice of a main entree that's sort of our primary choice, and then a couple of other options, a vegan and a mac and cheese option for particularly aimed at kids. And volunteers get together, cook, prepare, package, hand out meals for guests to take home on Wednesday. We started about 3 months ago, and we've distributed over just about 1,000 dinners to guests in that time. So it's now ending up to be somewhere between 80 and 90 dinners a night that we give out. And one of the things that's really great about this, a challenge we felt was with the dinner was well received, but it tended to be individuals or couples, but not families. And we know there are families that are struggling. Look, if you look at the numbers. This model gives us more connection to families, because a family, we allow a guest to order one meal for each member of the family. And if there are kids who don't want to eat they want to eat mac and cheese and not the main meal, we have that as an option. So where that 80 to 90 tends to be somewhere between 30 and 35 families that we're addressing. So that's kind of a different dimension of it. So this has gotten off to a good start. We sort of worked out the kinks. There's a picture there of some of our volunteers getting ready to hand out meals to folks who are driving out. You'll see Susie Berry there on the far right. I mentioned the Bagged Lunch Initiative. We started that in June of 2020 to work with the Community Day Center in Waltham, which is a day shelter for people who are unhoused. And they had been preparing a regular meal for their guests, but with the pandemic, they needed to pivot from that. So we take Thursdays and we do 40 bagged lunches for them each week. Sandwiches, fruit, snacks. The fruits come mostly from Food Link, and those are delivered to Waltham. In December we crossed the 5,000 meal mark for them, so we had delivered 5,000 bags for them. We also, sometimes guests don't get to pick up the meals from the prepared meals program. Fortunately, those don't go to waste. Those are delivered on Thursday mornings to the Community Day Center for their use with their guests. So it provides a good system for us to kind of keep the loop closed. We also started in December a sandwich brigade initiative, and we had for Middlesex Community College students. And each Wednesday, volunteers prepare about 125 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for distribution at Middlesex Community College to their students. It's part of an effort that the school has undergone to help its students fight food insecurity. It's a particular problem for community college students because they're balancing school, work, family, etc., and trying to keep everything afloat. And often the food challenges are significant. I think this is a population we all want to strive. These are a population of strivers. We want to help them succeed. And the school has a terrific effort which we could plug into. And the nice thing about peanut butter and jelly is it's relatively shelf stable for a couple of days. They pick them up on Thursday after we produce them, on Wednesdays after we produce them, and then distribute them on Thursdays and Fridays to their staff. So that's been a nice added thing. So really 3 pieces to the stool right now. A number of important partnerships. We've talked about how essential FoodLink is to our work. They've been with us since the very beginning. When we got started, and Bruce was very instrumental in helping us organize the kitchen, he brought Ivan Bosch in, who's sitting here, to help kind of co-volunteer, bring food from FoodLink. Ivan is our shopper, which is terrific, and that's been a great partnership. I also mentioned the Minuteman High School Culinary Arts Program and the prepared meals program we had with them, but we also use them now for other things, like, for instance, for our Thanksgiving dinners, which is a bigger and more complicated dinner to produce. When we were in person, we had them produce those meals. When we pivoted to prepared meals, we asked them to do that. And they're doing a meal for us in February, in 2 weeks, when we have a lot of chefs who are not available. And we're going to have them do corned beef and cabbage for St. Patrick's Day as well. So it's a good additional resource. The food pantry we work very closely with. They're also located at the Great Hall and at the Church of Our Redeemer. We have many guests in common, and we work closely with the team there. And of course, the town human services play a very important role in helping connect us to people in need in Lexington and direct people to our program. How you can help, it's going to sound a lot like Elisa's pitch. Volunteers, we are a 100% volunteer organization. We have no paid staff. And we have a number of different efforts. The prepared meal program, we need volunteers for all aspects of that, from the cooking to the handing out of the meals. And that takes place on Wednesday afternoons between 2 and 6:30. Shift, and we have different shifts depending on what your particular role is. Sandwich making takes place on Wednesday and Thursday mornings between 10 and 11 a.m. And it's just amazing to watch those folks work, because sometimes it's only 45 minutes. They made 125 sandwiches or 40 bagged lunches, and I think people really enjoy that. So if you have time in the middle of the day and you're interested, that could be a good opportunity. Obviously, we rely on financial donations to support us, and we welcome those. Our website provides information on how to get them, or certainly talk to me if you want. And third, spread the word. Help people. Tell people you know. If you know somebody who may be struggling, let them know what we do, so that we can invite them in as part of our effort. And I'll just close to say that this January we delivered our 25,000th meal to a guest. When you combine the in-person meals, the prepared meals, and the various sandwiches, and that each of these efforts, albeit individually relatively small in number, on a week-by-week basis, accumulate to a significant impact. We're blessed with the volunteers that we have. In Lexington, this is a great town for recruiting volunteers. We can always use more, and I think together we've been able to make a dent in what's a very significant problem here in Lexington. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
I don't have any slides. So again, my name is Bruce Newman. I am a part of Lexington Refugee Assistance Program. And before I talk about what we do, I want to paint a little bit of a picture. So everybody sort of knows what a refugee is. I wanted the United Nations High Commission on Refugees definition is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. I looked up the current numbers. Currently there are 21.3 million refugees worldwide, and that doesn't even count people who are internally displaced, so they had to leave their home, but they're still in their home country. An asylum seeker is a little different. An asylum seeker is someone who has somehow or another found their way to this country and then said, I can't go back because of the same fears. I fear of persecution. So many refugees spend 10 years or more in a refugee camp, going through a lengthy process with the UN High Commission, looking for, being vetted, looking for permission to leave the camp and go to another country. Each country has certain limits on the number of people they will take in. So eventually, some refugees make it to the United States, and the system is changing a little bit, but the basic system for quite a number of years has been that there are a number of refugee resettlement organizations. So the U.S. government says, okay, we're giving you 10 people this month, you figure out what to do with them. So those include Catholic Charities, International Institute of New England up in Lowell, Centria based in Worcester. And again, things are changing, but when LexRep first started, basically those refugee resettlement organizations gave 3 months of support, and then you're on your own. Now, these are people who come from all walks of life. Some are workmen, some are physicians, some speak English, some don't speak English, some come as an individual, some come as families. Some of them have spent 10 or more years in a refugee camp. Their children not getting any education even in their own language. So it's quite a mixed bag what they come with, including the trauma. Some of them have been victims of real trauma, some of them have witnessed it, and all of them have the experience of, I have to leave my home. I have to go somewhere else. And that's, I just, I've worked with many of these folks that we deal with, and I have a hard time comprehending that, because I don't see that for me. So that's kind of the picture of the background. It must be 7 years ago now, during the height of the news about the Syrian crisis, where, last August it was news about Afghanistan. Well, 7 years ago it was Syria, and every day in the news was pictures of people desperate to leave a country that was crumbling in front of them. So during that period, a woman named Marianne Boswell, she's a Lexington resident, wrote a note to the Lexington listserv saying, I have an empty room, I'm sure other people do, there must be something we can do. So a bunch of people corresponded with her. We ended up meeting. We ended up meeting for probably a year, inviting people from Catholic Charities, ILA&E, Centria, to come and talk to us about sort of like, what's the landscape of refugees coming here? What do they need? What can we do? And what we came to was a recognition that there are, I'll say, countless numbers of refugees in Massachusetts who had their 3 months of support from one of these resettlement organizations, and then they're on their own. And I'd like to ask you how well you think you would do if you got sent to Afghanistan and didn't know the language or any of the cultural norms. It's a big job to adjust. And so we saw there's a big need there. And then the other thing is asylum seekers. So in the case of asylum seekers, the United States says, yes, you can stay here for the time being until we give you a hearing, but you can't work. How do they live? So we ended up saying, we are going to help refugees who have finished their 3 months of support from their resettlement agencies and asylum seekers. So what do we do? We do a variety of things, and part of it has grown out of just a recognition that every individual, every family is a different situation. So, there's a doctor who came from Iraq. He speaks English. He's educated. But is there any chance that he can practice medicine in the United States? And the long answer is, in his case, is no. Which is a sad thing, but there was a lot of effort spent in supporting him and figuring out what the pathway would be and could he practice. Other people come with no particular skill set, and how do you find them a job, and how do you find them housing? So we try to meet people where they are, figure out what their needs are, and help them with their needs. So those include helping to find housing. Most refugees, until they get a classic American full-time job with benefits, are on mass health. But that's a logistical nightmare if you don't speak English and don't know the culture. SNAP benefits, food benefits. So we have people that will help them navigate that. Getting their kids registered in school. So at this point we've got a lot of experience with Lexington Public Schools. The schools know our organization, and in particular a few members of it, and have now some experience dealing with refugee children and what sort of support they need. But if the parents who don't speak English tried to figure out all of that on their own, again, it's a logistical nightmare. So we help them get their kids registered for school. Everybody needs tutoring, so the kids, as I said, some of these kids were in refugee camps. Not only do they not speak English, but they're behind in their own, behind where they ought to be had they been in school in their own country. So they need a lot of help. The kids pick up English really quickly, but they need a lot of tutoring to bring them up to speed in subject matter. Adults need English as a second language tutoring. I mentioned the doctor, so there was a lot of effort trying to figure out if he could practice medicine. but others are sort of like, well, what are you going to do here? And in a minute I'm going to tell one particular story, but you know, helping them find a job, encouraging them towards thinking about a new career, and in some cases supporting education. So we had one man who had been a mechanic in Iraq, I think, but was unable to get a job here until we, LexRap paid for him to go to mechanic school in the U.S., and then he got a job at a Chevy dealership. Prior to that, he'd been working, cleaning toilets and being a porter at a local B&B. So that was a big upgrade for him in income and self-respect. And through all the specifics of what we do, there's a whole lot of helping people understand the culture. And, you know, most of us go about our daily lives and sort of are so familiar with the U.S. culture that we don't think about how different other cultures can be. This includes things like idioms. Well, that's water over the dam, which we would say very quickly and blithely, and they're sort of like, what? We run into issues of a different understanding of work. So we're pretty oriented towards, you go to work unless you're really sick and you don't miss a whole lot of days, or you risk, you know, some censure or getting fired. And in some other countries, the whole under the work ethic, well, that's a judgmental thing. The understanding of the relationship of your personal life and work is a little different. And we have to hold their hands and say, I'm sorry, I know you really don't want to go to work today, but you really need to, because if you miss too many days, you're going to get fired. There, in the Muslim culture, there is, you're not allowed to take, or people aren't supposed to give loans. It's against the faith to charge money for loaning. So what about credit cards? And how do you build a credit score, which is necessary if you're going to buy a house? And you know, a house includes mortgage, so there's lots of conversations about how things work here, and shifting understandings of how to accommodate your own sense of my norms with the new norms in the country. So, I don't know how much time I have, but I want to tell at least one story. So my wife and I said early on, we were empty nesters. Kids, 3 kids all going off to college. And we were so like, we could take somebody in. We have extra bedrooms. So fairly early on in this process, we were in dialogue with an organization called Refugee Immigration Ministries, and said, we could take somebody in. Do you have anybody? And forgetting the name of the woman who was director of that time, and she said, I have a young woman from Uganda. I'd like to take her to my own house, but I can't do it. Why don't you meet her? So I'm going to call her Jane. We met Jane, liked her, fine, and invited her to come live with us. She did. We had no idea how long that was going to be. It ended up being 2 years. So she was an asylum seeker. She found her way to this country, but didn't know about applying for asylum. She just said, I have to get out of Uganda or I'm going to die. Found a way and just kind of disappeared off the map. She spent better part of a year, I believe, basically couch surfing, finding one person or another who would put her up. There was one situation where the woman said, well, you can stay here, but I'm not going to let you leave the house. There was another situation where she was in not that big an apartment with 5 men, also all refugees. And I think nothing happened, but she was like, this doesn't feel comfortable. So when she landed with us, there was not only the initial trauma of leaving Uganda in fear of her life, but 9 months or a year of sort of like uncertainty in this country. It's like, what's going to happen to me? So our first job was, you're safe, you're secure, you're in a stable place, just relax. And that doesn't happen overnight when you've been through that. So over a period of time, just giving her space and comfort and food, we began to say, okay, you're in the US, you're going to apply for asylum. What do you want to do for work? And she had done a couple of small business things in Uganda, and she said, I want to do some sort of business. And aware that some really high percentage of new businesses fail, and aware that she had no clue, again, the whole culture thing, she had no clue to the requirements of getting a business up and running in the US. We said, don't do it. And it took months to sort of talk her out of it. What she ended up saying is, you know, I think I want to be a nurse. So she had her undergraduate degree in Uganda, had not been covered much biology, so she had some prerequisites. She enrolled at Bunker Hill Community College. LexRap paid for those courses because she didn't yet have her work authorization. So she took, I don't know, 4 or 5 courses at Bunker Hill. LexRap supported that. In the meantime, she got her work authorization, found a job. I think the first one was at Home Depot for $14 an hour or something. She applied to nursing schools. She got into the University of Massachusetts at Boston nursing program, which is a fairly well respected program. Somewhere in this timetable, she was sort of like, felt like she really wanted to be on her own. So she moved out. This is before the nursing school actually started. And then, you know, we had to have a very frank conversation with her about money. So like, add this up. You have this much in rent and this much in school, and you're making this much, and it doesn't work out. The math doesn't work out. We found her another place where she could live for free in Somerville, this time an easier commute. So she stayed there probably 2 years more while she was going to nursing school. She was also working full-time. This woman was the hardest working person I have ever met. I think she operates on like 2 hours of sleep a night. In December, she got her degree and is now working at one of the major hospitals in Boston. And we feel like this is a great success story. Somebody showed up, you know, give us your huddled masses. She wasn't a huddled mass, but, you know, not far away from it. And through the support that we gave and her own initiative, you know, and an unusually hard work ethic, she's really landed on her feet and has a good career ahead of her. And the next step is that she is really hoping to bring her kids over. She has kids who are living with her mother still in Uganda. I would love to tell another story, but I've been going on for 20 minutes and I think that's more than I'm supposed to, so maybe that's...
We have time for questions.
Yeah.
Do we need to use that microphone, or are you?
No, if you just speak loud enough, I should be able to get it.
Okay, so, questions? I have plenty, but I'm sure everybody else does too.
Start with one from you.
I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about Lexington, and one of the questions I had was, do we have a homeless or unhoused population in Lexington, and does anybody deal with them?
We are aware of some unhoused people in Lexington.
Okay.
And we have dealt with them, and the food pantry has dealt with them. And I know Town Services is makes an effort to be in touch with
Okay.
situations like that. I don't know that it's a large population, but anybody trying to live outside, especially in weather like
Right,
this,
yeah.
is too many, and so that's, yeah, there are efforts that are underway to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you. On the food link, do you adhere? You know how all the especially packaged food expires on dates. What do you do about that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And one other thing I'll add to what George said about unhoused folks is my suspicion in Lexington is you likely see much more folks who are couch surfing than are actively unhoused because with rent rates so high, there's a very large portion of people who are couch surfing these days, and it's very hard for the government to count that. So there's a lot more people who are unhoused or homeless than we realize in the state. But yes, expiration dates are a huge part of what we do. So important thing to understand about expiration dates, or as we'll talk about them, we'll call them code dates, because you'll see things like best by, sell by, fresh by, processed on, etc. This is not a regulated term by the government and has very little to do with food safety. It has to do with brand protection. So companies are putting that on to say this is the guaranteed date that this will be fresh and we will maintain our brand quality by. And so the grocery stores know when to cycle it off the shelf. Most food is perfectly safe well past those dates. Greater Boston Food Bank has done research on this and has found, has a set of extension dates that I'm happy to share with folks. But most of the time, things in cans are going to be good somewhere between 3 and 5 years past the date printed on them. Things in boxes, you're going to see probably 18 months. Dairy products, more like 5 days to a week, depending on the product. But most of those, like the date on milk, I'm sure most people have experienced milk that's gone bad past the date. And if you've kept it around, you might experience milk that is good well beyond the date. It has to do with how it's handled more than anything. So we use Greater Boston Food Bank's guidance and do give out food past date. However, we do find that many of our agencies, the folks they're serving, still worry about these dates. So we are in regular conversation with folks about which agencies will take the past code date food, which won't. So often places that have folks cooking for the agency, so meal programs and shelters, they really are happy with that because it's chefs and they get it. Versus, for example, a lot of our agencies that serve immigrants and refugee populations, that gets a little bit trickier because it's really hard to get past that language barrier. They'll see a date and be like, what is this about? Or food pantries, folks will worry about those too. So we are regularly trying to educate folks, but it's a consumer issue that's a big one that I think a lot of work is being done to educate broadly on as well right now. So we're hopeful that that will start to move things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we benefit from the fact that there's food that Trader Joe's no longer wants to offer to its customers for its commercial brand protection reasons,
Yeah.
as you put it. We can take that and use that and prepare it safely and deliciously for people, even though it doesn't meet their own internal guidelines.
Yeah, so it's certainly a major reason we get food donated, but it's not the only one.
I just wanted to point out that I didn't earlier that our state representative, Michelle Sokola, is with us today. Thank you for coming, Michelle.
Wonderful presentation by all of you. Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
I certainly learned a lot today. I don't know about the rest of you. Yeah.
I actually have a question. This is kind of for all three of you,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
oh, I'm Abby. I'm Rep Sokola's aide.
Oh, I knew you looked familiar.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
we've met once
Yeah,
or
we
twice.
have.
But anyways, my question is kind of, I don't know how to like phrase it in a succinct way, so this is going to kind of be a roundabout thing. But so like if I'm a parent and I'm food insecure and therefore my kids are food insecure, and I go to any of these organizations and like and therefore admitting like I am food insecure, my kids don't have enough to eat, what is the risk for them in like CPS being notified or DCF or anything like bad happening to them?
Social services.
Do you have reporting requirements if parents show up with kids that?
No.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no,
That's what I was
mean, we
looking
haven't, and we haven't encountered, I'm trying to think in that, in you know, our 7 years or so in business, we haven't encountered situations like that we felt were, you know, that anybody said, oh, this is a reportable situation.
You don't even take people's names if they don't want to give them. You don't
That's-
ask them any
that's right,
information.
yeah.
They just have a meal.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we don't serve the public directly, but none of our agencies do, and we actually end up in this bind a lot of the time with our agencies where there's a lot of funders really want folks to report who they're serving, but our agencies don't want to because of this fear. But I'm a social worker, and that is not on the menu of things that I would report to Department of Children and Family on like my mandatory reporting. Food insecurity, I think, is just, it's too common and too complicated to put that on the families. Yeah, it's a great question though, because perception of risk keeps people from accessing services. And it's interesting to hear that one. I haven't heard that specific one, but I wonder how many families worry about losing their children, and that keeps them from being able to access the services that will really help them. And that's really heartbreaking to me how much we see that.
Yeah.
I think in our community, one thing which have been attuned to is the stigma that comes with it, because that's another, leave aside your question about the legal risk, but how am I presenting myself, and how will others know? And that's something that we try to make the experience as dignified as possible, so that we remove that and as much as we can.
I know some of you may remember some years ago at the now demolished Quality Inn on Bedford Street, the state housed families with children. And those children then went to Estabrook School. And we got involved with the schools because the parents were coming to the teachers and the principal for their social, you know, how do I get food stamps? Well, that's not what a school principal does, right? So we came here to the human services people, and we devised a plan to work with this. But one of the things that happened was well-meaning parents were bringing their children's old backpacks and clothes to donate them to these children. So now the kid living in Quality Inn showed up at school in this coat or this backpack, and other kids would say, oh, that was Johnny's last year. And so we learned from the social services people here not to give cast off clothes to the people that are going to the next group who are going to see them. Better to give them gift cards to TJ Maxx or whatever, which was close to them, so that they could buy their own things for the children. And that was a revelation to me. I had never heard that before. And again, the people who donated their old things, old but serviceable, meant well.
Right.
So, Wendy? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just had a question about the refugee program. I was so impressed with your story about the woman from Uganda and the incredible amount of time and effort put into that one person to salvage her life and put her on a great path. And you're right, it's an absolute success story. But talk about labor intensive, you know. And I'm wondering how many refugees come to Lexington, and how many are you able to deal with in any given time?
We currently have 70 some people who are in our net. One of the refugees actually called it a tribe. Those folks are in various states of need. So there was a young man who was an architect from Rwanda who needed help for about 6 months, landed on his feet, got a job, bingo. You know, the person that hosted him stays in touch. We talk. I helped him move something recently, but he's not in daily need. You know, there's another family that has 5 kids. It's been here for 5 years or more. The kids are still getting tutoring. The parents are still getting regular encouragement and advice. We are currently hosting 2 young women, sisters who were Afghan evacuees, both of whom are actually in school, and that was part of the story I would have told how that happened. But so they're not at our house all the time, but we talk to them regularly, and when they are at our house, we talk to them. So it's you know,
Varies a lot.
it varies a lot in terms of the time commitment.
And when they come to you, I mean, how is it determined how you can take a family on? I mean, do you take a certain number of families each year, or do you're contacted about a particular case and you?
Do we have enough volunteers? Do we have somebody who has been volunteering who's willing to step up? So there's a position called the family lead, and the lead is the person who coordinates all the volunteers and all the needs and says, hey, this family needs something, how are we going to find that? So do we have enough volunteers? Do we have somebody willing to step up to be a lead? If it's a situation where there's actual need for housing, I mean, in-home housing like the 2 girls, is there somebody who's a good place to put them? And you know, some of it's really bandwidth. I mean, we have only so much energy and supervisory energy to, you know, we can't just say, okay, let's take 100 people this year.
And you,
So, my name is Connie Parrish, and I live in Lexington. When you first got involved, I mean, you said, we have a room, there's this overwhelming need, let's do something. What kind of support did you get? I mean, you can't just jump in there and say, I've got 2 bedrooms, I'll take, you know, however many people, and I mean, if I were to do that, I know I would need some education, some support.
So
guidance.
we had very little support, but didn't recognize what we needed. So at the beginning, this was like one of the first things that we took on. I don't want to say we were clueless, but there was a lot that we hadn't learned. Dealing with what I'm calling Jane was a day-to-day thing. It's like, how you doing? You know, just like having a daughter who's just come back from college and doesn't have a job yet. You know, it's not so different from that. You know, and there's a good group of people. So when we would run into something, we'd run it up. You know, say, hey, here's a situation. Anybody have any ideas? And, you know, at this point, we've developed a pretty good bit of knowledge, and so if somebody was going to take somebody into their house, most likely me would go to them and say, okay, here's what's involved, you know, here's what you're getting yourself into.
Thank you. Well, I think it's 10:30, so if anybody else has a pressing question, I want to thank the three presenters today. I know I learned a lot. I think a lot of us learned a lot, and I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate your organizations also. Before we leave, I just want to make a few quick announcements. On Thursday, February 16th at 7 p.m., we're doing our local candidates night at Clark Middle School. It is in person this year. We are doing the precinct meetings, even though there's only 2 of the 9 precincts that have contested races. And since none of the town-wide races are contested, and adhering to league rules about potential empty seat debates, we are just going to adjourn to the auditorium so people can talk to whichever of those candidates show up. I know I've heard from one of them already, but typically when you have an unopposed one, they tend not to show, so that would violate the league policies on those things. So that's what we're going to do on February 16th at Clark Middle School. And then our next First Friday is March 3rd, and it will be back at the library, and we have our organizer here, Wendy. The topic is going to be the Special Permit Residential Development, or the SPRD, and I believe there's a warrant article coming up on the town meeting about that, right?
There is. It's one of the major zoning articles that's coming up, and it has to do with creating some additional option for developers. We're trying to give them options other than building very large homes on single lots, but rather to create more sustainable and affordable housing. And this is an effort we've been working on for years to try and encourage this kind of development, and this is our latest effort in framing some zoning that will encourage that kind of development. So, and like all zoning, it requires a fair amount of explanation, so we would really welcome you to come, and we'll try to present it as clearly as possible what our proposals are.
One small step towards making these things become reality is with the, I believe the legislature changed the law that instead of having to have a 2/3 vote for these things to pass town meeting, you just have a simple majority, 50% plus 1. Because a lot of times things would get 60% vote, but because it didn't get that 2/3, so the legislature took that into heart and made that a little bit easier. So that'll be interesting to see too. So,
yeah, and there seems to be a lot more, I think the town is more and more focused on this desperate need for affordable housing in Lexington and in the state generally. And we seem to have reached a point, the town is quite receptive, I think, to these ideas. And we're in the process of creating a housing trust for funding for this kind of thing. We've had good support in the legislature for this. And also in the process of forming a nonprofit housing corporation to do some of the building. So these initiatives have all passed the town vote recently, and I think it's coming to a point where there's more awareness of things that need to be done, and this is another step. So we're working on it.
long, slow process though. So with that, I think we will adjourn, and I hope everybody can stay warm for the next 24 hours, I guess it's all. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for coming today.